Hello there, and welcome back to the Sleep Science. Tonight, you open your eyes into a world on fire. A jungle, chirping, hissing, then suddenly nothing. A flash in the sky, brighter than the sun, followed by the slow, shuddering breath of a planet about to change forever. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I always love reading those. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through a humid Cretaceous forest, the air thick with the aroma of damp ferns and something sour, like ozone after a lightning strike. The dinosaurs don't seem worried yet. A hadrosaur eyes you with vague indifference. Somewhere, a tyrannosaur bellows. It echoes against limestone cliffs that haven't been named yet. The sky is a brilliant blue and you almost forget what's coming. Almost. Then just above the western horizon, the impossible appears. A glowing speck growing by the second. You blink. It's not a star. It's not even flying. It's falling. That's the Chicxulub asteroid, roughly 10 kilometers across. About the size of Mount Everest if someone had decided to give it orbital velocity and zero remorse. It's moving at 20 times the speed of a bullet, enough kinetic energy to trigger earthquakes on the far side of the planet. Scientists estimate it struck with the force of 10 billion Hiroshima bombs. Not 10 million, 10 billion. You do not have a word for that kind of violence. You can't look away. The asteroid slams into the Yucatan Peninsula, near where sleepy beachgoers in Cancun now sip margaritas. For a fraction of a second, it punches through the crust like a spoon through yogurt, compressing the air so violently that it becomes plasma. Everything, absolutely everything, within 1,000 kilometers is vaporized. Dinosaurs, gone. Trees, gone. Your carbon vapor before your brain finishes processing the sound. But the worst part is what comes next. If you stood far enough away to witness the full scale, say from a nice safe bunker in Madagascar, which won't exist for another 65 million years, you watch the sky catch fire. Not just here and there, everywhere. The impact hurls trillions of tons of molten rock into space, which rains back down across the globe like tiny meteors. The sky glows orange red for hours, then days, as forests ignite spontaneously, and the very atmosphere becomes a conveyor belt of heat. There's a thin layer in Earth's crust today that captures this exact moment, the iridium layer, rich in a rare metal common in asteroids. You could take a shovel into almost any part of the world and dig down to find it, a silent, silvery fingerprint of one really bad day. Above it, nothing, no dinosaur fossils. Below it, a party of biodiversity. Above, ashes and birds. Historians still argue whether all the dinosaurs died immediately or some limped on for centuries in isolated refuges, but the fossil record is not optimistic. The asteroid struck in the perfect place to be maximally catastrophic, rich in gypsum, which released sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere, blocking out sunlight. Global temperatures plummeted. Photosynthesis stopped. Plankton died. That was the real killer, not the firestorm, but the long, cold darkness that followed. It's not unlike drawing the blackout curtains after a very, very bright lamp explodes in your face. Oddly enough, some species survived. Crocodiles, turtles, frogs, creatures that could hibernate or live in aquatic ecosystems. And then, those strange little mammals you never gave much thought to, the ones scampering underfoot during the Age of Giants. They were warm-blooded, omnivorous, and adaptable. They tucked themselves away in burrows and leaf litter while the sky burned above. You watch them now, blinking in the ashy dawn of a new era, unaware that one day their descendants will invent cryptocurrency, inflatable hot tubs, and reality TV. And also you. A quirky tidbit. Some scientists think the impact made the sky bright enough to trigger photosynthesis. At night, for a brief moment. Just long enough for some plants to freak out and try one last bloom. Panic blooming plants, that's not a comforting image. And still, here you are, walking a land that isn't land anymore. Mexico's coastline is gone. The Gulf of Mexico has been rearranged. Shockwaves ripple through Earth's mantle like a tuning fork struck with malice. In India, thousands of kilometers away, massive volcanic eruptions called the Deccan Traps are already mid-performance. Did the asteroid trigger more eruptions? Historians still argue, but the timing is suspicious. Like a thunderclap following a distant flash, it all feels connected. Everything smells like wet charcoal. The sun won't return for years. The forests are gone, the food chains broken, the ecosystems collapsed. And in the silence that follows, you walk among the ghosts of a lost world. At least 75% of species on Earth vanish in the aftermath. That's what we call a mass extinction, one of the big five in Earth's history. But for you, wandering in the soot and cinders, it feels like more than that. It feels personal. The kind of bad day that echoes across 66 million years. You pass the skeleton of a triceratops, half buried in blackened soil, its frill chipped and scorched. A baby hadrosaur lies nearby, curled in on itself like it never saw what hit it. Maybe it didn't. Small blessings. You move on and the earth turns. Slowly, stubbornly, ash settles into ocean sediment. Life shrinks down, tightens up, and waits. Because while this feels like the end of the world, it's actually a beginning, quiet and tentative. In the shadows of disaster, evolution gets weird. Tiny mammals start to radiate, try new things. Some get bigger, some get smarter. One grows thumbs and eventually builds a moon rocket. You squint up at the sky. No stars tonight. Just a glowing haze, faint auroras dancing where they shouldn't. But Earth spins on, cracked and limping, somehow still alive. Welcome to the first time the world nearly ended. You wake in the soot-thick silence that follows the end of everything. There's no birdsong, no rustling leaves. Even the wind seems reluctant, whispering low through scorched branches like it's afraid of waking something worse. You blink and cough. The sky isn't black exactly. It's that heavy, matte gray that turns midday into dusk and turns your shadow into a stranger you barely recognize. This is what comes after the Chicxulub impact. The slow, smoldering fallout of planetary trauma. If the initial blast was the punch, this is the part where the Earth lays motionless, blinking at the stars, trying to remember its own name. You walk across a landscape that barely resembles a planet anymore. Trees have become charcoal sculptures. Rivers have boiled dry. Everything smells like metal and wet smoke. Tiny glass beads crunch under your feet. Tektites, they're called, formed when molten rock launched into space cooled and rained back down in droplets. You imagine them as the Earth's shattered window panes, flung outward during impact, now littering the yard. But here, the odd part. This wasn't a clean slate. It was a very dirty, complicated one. The impact released not just fire and fury, but climate-altering chemicals. Dust, soot, and sulfur compounds filled the stratosphere, forming a sun-blocking veil that encircled the globe. Global temperatures plummeted up to 15 degrees Celsius in some models. Crops wouldn't grow, not that there were many left. Photosynthesis shut down. Ocean phytoplankton died en masse. Without them, food chains collapsed. It's like someone took the bottom card from the house of cards and just let it fall. Some call this period an impact winter. And it lasted for months, maybe years. And you, stumbling through the dark, get the sense that time has slowed. Days blur together. Plants try to grow but fail. Animals wander and starve. The ones who survive the initial blast are left with an even harder task, surviving after it. Oddly enough, there's a kind of quiet beauty in it. The sky, layered with ash, sometimes glows with strange colors at sunset, muted purples and eerie greens. If you didn't know better, you'd call it pretty. But then your stomach growls and the cold seeps deeper into your bones and the silence presses in again. You stumble across what looks like a burrow. Not deep, just a tangle of roots and dirt. Inside, a creature stirs, a small, furry thing, barely the size of a hamster. It blinks at you with weary defiance. This, believe it or not, might be one of your oldest ancestors. The mammals who'd spent the past 100 million years dodging dinosaurs and nibbling bugs in the shadows suddenly found themselves alone in the buffet line. No tyrannosaurs to dodge, no raptors to outwit. Just them, the darkness and the cold. They weren't strong or fast or particularly smart yet, but they had one enormous evolutionary advantage. They could adapt. They could eat almost anything. They could huddle for warmth. And most importantly, they could reproduce fast. Not flashy, not glamorous, but very effective in a world where you're always one cold night away from joining the fossil record. You walk with them for a while, these tiny, shivering survivors. You watch them gnaw seeds, burrow deeper, squeak softly to each other. There's no hero music playing, but this is the start of something. A comeback. And just when you start to feel a spark of hope, you remember that not all dinosaurs disappeared. That's right, birds. Those twitchy little velociraptor descendants outside your window, pooping on cars and singing at 4 a.m., are technically survivors of the end Cretaceous extinction, the only dinosaurs to make it through. Historians still argue whether their lineage survived thanks to their smaller size, their beaks, or their bizarre respiratory systems. But somehow, they did. In fact, some researchers think their ancestors also went underground, literally or metaphorically, and rode out the darkness in forests or marshlands. One theory even suggests the birds that survived were mostly ground dwellers, not tree perchers because, well, the trees were gone. Here's your quirky tidbit. In the years following the impact, Earth's ozone layer may have been so damaged by nitric acid rain that UV radiation levels reached deadly highs. Survivors might have had to avoid the sun entirely. Imagine a planet scorched and sunburned. Just rude. As you wander on, the days slowly begin to brighten, just a little, enough for moss to peek through the ash, enough for something green to find its way upward. The air warms, the clouds thin, and life impossibly returns. Some geologists argue that the post-impact period should count as the start of a new era, the Paleogene technically, but emotionally, this is the dawn after the nightmare, a reset button pressed with the weight of the cosmos. You find a trickling stream, cold, muddy, but alive. A few insect larvae twitch in the water, probably wondering where all their predators went. Frogs croak. Somewhere, a fern uncurls. The resilience of life is maddening. You'd think it would take the hint and give up, but no, it claws its way back inch by inch. You squat by the stream, staring into the reflectionless water. Behind you, smoke still rises from ruined forests, but ahead, there's motion. Not fast, not loud, but motion. In this part of the timeline, there are no cities, no Wi-Fi, no snack bars. Just survivors and the weight of what came before. And yet, here in the ashes, you can almost sense the long road ahead. The rise of mammals, the spread of grasslands, the eventual invention of traffic jams and karaoke. But that's centuries, millennia away. Right now, it's enough just to sit, breathe, and wait for the sun to come back. Because the sky that burned forever has finally started to cool. You move forward slowly now, into the thick and trembling silence of a world that barely remembers color. The plants are clawing their way back, inch by miserable inch, and you follow the struggling green like a breadcrumb trail through time. Days stretch. Seasons tentatively return. The earth turns as it always has, but with a limp. Now you find yourself somewhere else, somewhere steamy, raw, and terrifyingly loud. The sky is no longer choked with soot, but the air still tastes faintly of sulfur. You wipe sweat from your brow again, and again. It never stops. This time, the world doesn't end with a bang. It simmers. Welcome to Indonesia. Well, Proto-Indonesia. The year is approximately 74,000 BCE. There are no humans here in the modern sense, just early Homo sapiens clinging to a hard-earned foothold on a world that doesn't seem particularly enthusiastic about keeping them around. But at least the dinosaurs are gone, right? You glance up. The sun hangs hot and bloated over a ring of distant mountains, but those aren't mountains. They're the outer rim of a caldera, and beneath your feet, miles below, a monster stirs. Mount Toba isn't just any volcano. It's a supervolcano. The kind that doesn't just dribble lava, it empties the pantry. In one terrifying burst, Toba will eject nearly 3,000 cubic kilometers of material. That's not a typo. It's the largest known volcanic eruption on Earth in the last 2 million years. If Mount St. Helens was a sneeze, Toba is a full-body explosion that ruptures the very atmosphere. You don't even get a chance to run. The first blast isn't just sound, it's presence. A pressure wave so powerful it collapses lungs and forests and your concept of distance. Trees vaporize, rivers reverse. The sky, once a searing blue, goes black in a matter of hours. The ash cloud spreads like spilled ink across the Indian Ocean, blotting out daylight from India to the Arabian Peninsula. You stagger through the darkness, which is absolute. No sun, no moon, no stars. Just the choking weight of volcanic ash that falls like poisonous snow. You can't breathe. You can't see. The silence is punctuated only by distant, thunderous booms and the soft, horrifying whisper of ash on skin. The thing is, this isn't just a regional disaster. Toba launches so much ash and sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere that it triggers a global volcanic winter. Temperatures around the world drop by several degrees Celsius. Crops wither. Glaciers grow. This isn't a single bad year. It's the beginning of a long, slow freeze that may have lasted a decade or more. Now, here's the chilling part, pun intended. Some scientists believe this eruption very nearly wiped us out. Like, completely. There's a hypothesis called the Toba catastrophe theory, and it proposes that the aftermath of the eruption caused a massive human population bottleneck. Fewer than 10,000 humans may have survived worldwide. Some say the number dropped as low as 1,000. 1,000. That's fewer people than attend a mid-sized music festival, fewer than your average high school, fewer than the population of some apartment complexes. Historians still argue whether the Toba eruption really caused such a severe bottleneck. Some evidence supports it, while other studies suggest early humans may have been more resilient than we thought. Genetic data shows reduced diversity around this time, but the cause remains debated. What's clear, though, is that something hit humanity hard, and Toba is the most obvious suspect. You sit beside a half-buried shelter, watching the ash drift down in endless sheets. A small group huddles nearby, early humans, their faces streaked with soot and desperation. Their tools are crude, but their eyes are clever. They've seen death before. They will see it again. But something in them, some glimmer of adaptability, burns too brightly to smother. There are no legends yet. No gods or monsters to explain the fire and cold. Just hunger, loss, and the relentless instinct to survive. And now for your quirky tidbit. A layer of Toba ash has been found 9,000 kilometers away in Lake Malawi in East Africa. That's like an explosion in New York leaving footprints in Buenos Aires. It gives you a sense of how wide-reaching this tantrum truly was. Back in Southeast Asia, the Earth rumbles again. Not a fresh eruption, just aftershocks. The kind that jangle your bones and loosen mountain peaks. You duck under a rocky overhang as another shelf of land slides noisily into the valley. The sky weeps black rain. And yet again, life doesn't end. It adapts. Some early human groups head south. They follow coastlines, scavenge what they can. Others push inland, toward oases of slightly less ruin. South Africa may have been one such refuge. Some archaeological sites there show continued human activity during this grim window. Others vanish, their stories erased like footprints in ash. The landscape changes. Animals go extinct, not just from the cold, but from the sudden loss of ecosystems. The megafauna take a hit. Trees don't grow back where they used to, but over time, inch by inch, the planet regains its balance. It takes centuries. One morning, far in the future, someone will walk along the caldera rim and see not ruin but beauty. Lake Toba forms within the collapsed crater, serene and impossibly vast. Tourists will come. Selfies will be taken. Little boats will drift over the sleeping maw of a volcano that once flirted with the apocalypse. And none of them will quite grasp how close we came to being a footnote. You stare across the lake now, long before there's a lake to stare at. The air is clearer, but it's not yet clean. The light filters through the dust in strange golden rays. For the first time in weeks, you can see your shadow. It doesn't look like much, but it's still there. And sometimes, survival is enough. You trudge through the ash-laced twilight of a world on pause. The skis have cleared a little, and the air doesn't burn your throat anymore, but the silence still feels too wide, too deep. This isn't the silence of peace. It's the long breath held between extinction and survival. You follow the echoes of Mount Toba's eruption into the realm of humans, or the nearest thing to them that still breathes. Not modern humans, not exactly. These are your ancestors' ancestors, napstone carriers with sloped foreheads, hardened hands, and fire in their eyes. They're not immortalized in stone or myth, because most of them didn't make it. You walk beside a small band, now 20, maybe 30 people at most. They're crossing a plain of brittle grass and volcanic sediment, the soil too cold to grow much, the rivers shrunken and bitter. Food is scarce. Infants are rare. The elders are mostly gone, and no one sings anymore. Welcome to the theorized genetic bottleneck, a term that sounds vaguely like a startup crash but is in fact much scarier. The idea is this: after the Toba super eruption, humanity's global population may have shrunk to fewer than 10,000 individuals. Some models say just 1,000 people. Imagine the entire human race crammed into a minor league baseball stadium. That's it. That's all you've got to reboot civilization. The genetic evidence comes from a peculiar lack of variation in certain parts of the modern human genome. You're more alike than you'd expect for a species that spans the globe. It's as if your family tree had most of its branches pruned, all at once, leaving just a few stubborn limbs to stretch forward in time. Like an evolutionary bonsai tree, if you want to ruin your next biology class. Historians still argue whether this bottleneck was truly caused by Toba's eruption, or whether climate shifts and migrations played larger roles. Some researchers even question whether the bottleneck happened at all. But if it did, it left scars deeper than any fossil bed. You press your fingers into the cold earth and feel the weight of a species trying to hold on. Every decision matters now. Who eats? Who sleeps? Who carries fire? Who risks the edge of the valley where the game still runs but the cliffs crumble? You watch two figures sharpen spears with obsessive care, not because they expect to hunt, but because not hunting isn't an option anymore. And yet they endure. One evening, crouched around a reluctant little fire, a child draws a shape in the soot with her finger. It's not a language, not yet, but it's a beginning. Her father grunts something approving. You don't speak the dialect, no one does, but you understand the moment. That flicker of imagination, that spark of continuity, is what makes this group different from the doomed creatures you've passed already. That spark may be the only reason you exist now. You walk farther, into what might be southern Africa, where caves provide shelter and sea breezes offer small comfort. Archaeological evidence suggests that some humans in this region kept thriving during the volcanic winter, maybe not flourishing, but surviving with surprising consistency. These refugia, as scientists call them, may have served as incubators for the gene pool, cozy little hideouts for the future of humanity. A quirky little twist. Some studies suggest that humans in these areas turned to shellfish and seaweed as fallback food sources during the colder years. Not very glamorous, but hey, calcium-rich limpets saved the species. So the next time you eat sushi, remember, it's apocalyptic cuisine. You rest in one of these caves now. There's a faint smell of firewood and salty air. A handful of tools lie nearby, bladelets, scrapers, the occasional hammerstone. Crude, yes, but shockingly sophisticated for the time. These people aren't just surviving, they're planning. You watch as a woman carefully breaks a piece of quartz to reveal a razor edge. She doesn't smile, but there's a set to her shoulders that says, "We will not be erased." And so, across thousands of years, the world warms again. Plants creep back. Herds of animals return, though some species never reappear. Woolly rhinos, short-faced bears, saber-toothed cats, all gone eventually. The cold took them, or we did, or both. Nature doesn't separate causes very well. Your footsteps lead you forward into a greener, quieter land. The glaciers retreat, and with them, so does the constant howl of extinction. Grasslands open up, rivers fatten, the winds no longer scream. The human population grows slowly at first. One child here, one clan there. You pass through a village of 40 people, then 70, then 100. It doesn't happen all at once, this rebuilding, but it happens. Here's a weird little twist for your sleepy brain. According to mitochondrial DNA studies, every human alive today may be descended from a single woman who lived around this time. They call her mitochondrial Eve, not because she was the only woman, but because her genetic line is the one that made it all the way to the present. It's a lonely kind of immortality. You glance up at the stars, trying to imagine what she saw when she looked skyward. Maybe nothing poetic, just weather. But maybe, just maybe, she whispered stories to her children about the fire mountain that burned the sky and how the world came back. Maybe memory was the first inheritance. The further you walk, the more familiar everything starts to feel. The tools grow more refined. Fire pits are ringed with stones. Shell beads and ochre pigments show up, suggesting a sense of identity. Not just survival, but culture. A species that can survive is impressive. A species that can remember, that's something else entirely. And so, you drift toward the edge of this long, cold night. The bottleneck may not have snapped the thread of human life, but it frayed it down to the last few strands. Every breath you take now is stitched from their survival. The world didn't end exactly, but it definitely forgot how to live for a while. You walk now through a very different world, greener, warmer, oddly familiar. The glaciers have begun their slow retreat, like rude party guests finally taking the hint, and the ice age that once gripped the planet is loosening its fingers. You feel the soil soft beneath your feet, and the trees whisper in a language that almost sounds like birdsong. But there's something off. The air tastes wrong, not poisonous, just sharp. Cold mornings arrive suddenly. Summers, when they come, feel half-hearted. Streams freeze overnight. Animals vanish without warning. And the sky, don't get too attached to the sky, it's up to something. Welcome to the tail end of the last ice age, around 12,900 years ago. Humanity is still figuring things out. You haven't quite invented writing or pants yet, but you've started domesticating dogs, gathering around campfires and planting seeds in cautious little rows. You're right on the edge of something big: agriculture, cities, Wi-Fi passwords. But first, the world has one more trick up its sleeve. It's called the Younger Dryas. Named after a little Arctic flower that doesn't usually get star billing in apocalyptic retellings, the Younger Dryas was a sudden return to glacial conditions after the planet had already started warming up. Just when early humans were getting cozy, planting things and building things, the climate did a dramatic reverse. Within a few short decades, or possibly even less, temperatures in the northern hemisphere plunged back to near-ice age levels. Glaciers surged. Rain patterns broke. Lakes froze over. Farming? Absolutely not. Historians still argue what caused it. That's part of the fun. One popular theory points to the sudden release of meltwater from glacial lakes in North America, which may have disrupted the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, a fancy name for the ocean's heat conveyor belt. Basically, the global thermostat got unplugged. The North Atlantic cooled. Europe froze. Everything else, predictably, freaked out. But then there's the spicy theory. Some scientists believe the Younger Dryas was triggered by something more dramatic: a comet. or rather fragments of a comet. According to the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, a swarm of space rocks struck Earth around this time, possibly targeting the North American ice sheets. The impact, or impacts, would have triggered wildfires, atmospheric changes, and a climate shift severe enough to slam the brakes on global warming. It's the bad roommate version of the Chicxulub asteroid, smaller, messier, and passive-aggressive. The evidence is controversial. There are strange black mats in the sediment layers, high concentrations of platinum, microscopic spherules that might or might not have formed during impact, a carbon-rich layer suggesting massive fires, even a site in Greenland with what might be a buried impact crater. But the debate rages on. Some say it's compelling, others say it's cosmic fan fiction. Still, as you walk across the tundra-tinged fields of ancient North America, you can't help but wonder. The mammoths are restless, the skis look heavy, and the forests, so recently returning, smell faintly of smoke. Your quirky tidbit: a group of researchers once suggested that the impact event, if it happened, might have hit a glacier so thick that it vaporized without leaving a visible crater, like throwing a grenade into a snowdrift. The explosion happens, but the evidence melts away. Convenient, suspicious, intriguing. And in the middle of all this uncertainty, there's Göbekli Tepe. You stumble upon it now, an archaeological site in southeastern Turkey that seems, frankly, too advanced for its time. Massive stone pillars arranged in circles, decorated with animals, carved with eerie precision. The thing is, Göbekli Tepe was built right around the end of the Younger Dryas. Some researchers believe it was constructed by hunter-gatherers in response to the chaos of the climate, a desperate attempt to control, or at least understand, a world that had gone completely off-script. Imagine that, the first temples rising not during prosperity but during crisis. You don't build monuments when life is easy. You build them when the sky betrays you and the ground won't grow food. You build them to ask questions that no one can answer. Like, why did the warmth vanish? What angered the gods? What fell from the stars? You kneel beside one of the carvings now, a vulture, a scorpion. Some scholars think these are constellations, an early attempt to document a celestial catastrophe. Others say that's a stretch. But either way, it's clear the people who built this place had memory. They remembered what the cold did, and they refused to forget. The world stays broken for over 1,000 years. Crops fail more often than they succeed. Human settlements vanish. Some groups turn back to nomadic life, chasing game that's thinning by the decade. And the megafauna, oh the poor megafauna, don't stand a chance. You pass the skeleton of a mammoth picked clean by time. Not long ago, it was a walking mountain of fur and muscle. Now it's a monument to what happens when ecosystems tilt too far, too fast. Was it the cold that killed them? The humans? The fires? Historians still argue. And still, humans persist. They keep gathering, keep experimenting, keep building strange stone circles in strange places. By the time the Younger Dryas ends around 11,700 years ago, something has shifted, not just in climate but in mindset. The planet warms again, finally, properly this time. Glaciers retreat for good. Sea levels rise, reshaping coastlines and mythologies. And humans start planting seeds with purpose. The Holocene dawns, agriculture blooms, villages become towns, language grows more complex, and from the bitter chill of 1,000 years of almost collapse, you step into the age of civilization. But you'll never quite forget that whisper in the sky, that maybe, just maybe, a comet came calling once. You walk into warmth now, not just from the sun overhead, but from the soft murmur of human voices. The world has finally shaken off the Younger Dryas. The ice has retreated, and the air feels gentle again, like it's inviting you to stay. And humans, being humans, immediately start building things. You pass between huts made of mud brick into a square where someone is shouting about barley. Civilization is having its first awkward, wonderful boom. Welcome to the late Bronze Age, somewhere around 1200 BCE. There are empires now, real ones, with kings, scribes, irrigation systems, and taxes. The Mediterranean is alive with trade routes and rivalries, the air filled with wood smoke, livestock, and optimism. And then everything falls apart. You stand at a harbor where merchant ships once bustled. Now they lie half-sunk, their cargo looted or rotting. The city's walls are cracked, ash streaks the temples, people have fled inland or disappeared entirely. This isn't one city, this is dozens. Hattusa, Ugarit, Mycenae, and more gone. Whole civilizations vanish in a period historians blandly call the Late Bronze Age collapse. And it's not just one bad day, it's a continental unraveling. You watch as letters never reach their destinations. One final tablet discovered in the ruins of Ugarit pleads desperately for help. The enemy is approaching our city, they are burning it, but no help comes. And the tablet is found in the ruins unbaked, the message never sent. So what happened? Well, we're not totally sure. It's like the Earth pressed a cosmic reset button again, only this time without asteroids or supervolcanoes. Just a series of extremely bad decisions, earthquakes, invasions, and maybe climate change thrown in for fun. Historians still argue whether it was a single cause or a perfect storm. Possibility 1, climate change. Tree ring data suggests severe, multi-year droughts hit the eastern Mediterranean. Crops failed. Trade broke down. Cities reliant on imported grain couldn't cope. You try farming when there's no rain and the sun feels like it's watching you too closely. Possibility 2, earthquakes. This region sits atop a web of seismic faults. If you were in the Aegean or Anatolia, you'd feel the ground grumble suspiciously often. Some scholars believe a wave of major quakes toppled cities, smashed infrastructure, and sparked chaos that never stopped spreading. Possibility 3, internal rebellion. Empires are great until people realize they're being taxed to death. In the chaos of drought and war, local populations may have overthrown elites, torching palaces and redistributing resources the old-fashioned way, with fire and bricks. Possibility 4, the Sea Peoples. We'll get to them properly in a moment, but they're essentially history's uninvited dinner guests. They arrived by sea, burned your city, and didn't leave a forwarding address. The ultimate chaotic neutral force. Now here's your quirky tidbit. During this collapse, entire writing systems vanished. Linear B, cuneiform in some regions, the scribal traditions that had kept state records, trade deals, and royal edicts, all disappeared. For hundreds of years, writing just stopped. Civilization hit the mute button. You walk through the ruins of a palace in Mycenae. Broken pottery crunches underfoot. A fresco of a lion hunt fades beneath the sun. The people who once ruled here are gone, maybe killed, maybe scattered to distant hills. Their stories. Unless they were carved into stone, you're not getting them back. And yet this collapse wasn't just about violence. It was about disconnection. The Bronze Age world was tightly interwoven, a network of city-states, empires, and trade hubs dependent on one another for tin, copper, grain, slaves, and prestige. Once one domino fell, the rest didn't stand a chance. When the tin stopped flowing, bronze stopped being made. No bronze, no swords. No swords, no army. No army, no kingdom. You can almost hear the soft pop of everything coming undone. It's the first globalization crash, and it wouldn't be the last. You stop in what used to be a market square. There's nothing for sale. The goods are gone and the buyers are dead or very far away. But there's a strange stillness here, not just the silence of destruction, but the quiet after something enormous has passed through. Civilization survives, just not the version you're used to. Egypt limps on. Assyria regroups. The Phoenicians start laying the seeds for their seafaring empire, but the palatial kingdoms of the Bronze Age toast. And into that power vacuum, new ideas creep in. Ironworking, for one. It's not as shiny or prestigious as bronze, but it's tougher and far more abundant. Humble, practical, and nearly indestructible. In many ways, iron is the metal of the rebuilding world. You follow a young blacksmith as he hammers out a crude iron blade in a smoky corner of a village that barely qualifies as a town. His anvil is pitted. His hammer's handle is cracked, but he's working. People are learning again, farming again, finding gods in new places and singing new songs in old valleys. Here's a historical fact to anchor you. Around this time, the Hittite Empire, one of the great powers of the Bronze Age, vanished so thoroughly that later civilizations forgot it even existed. It wasn't until the 19th century that archaeologists dug up their clay tablets and realized, oh, there was a whole forgotten superpower here. That's how deep the collapse ran. You walk onward through other ruins, some flooded, some buried under centuries of silt. It's easy to think of collapse as the end, but as always, the weeds grow back. New languages rise, myths evolve, trade resumes, though now it's rowboats instead of bronze ships, but it's still something. The world didn't end in fire this time. It ended in silence, in famine, in slow unraveling. And for those who lived through it, it probably felt just as world-ending as any comet or volcano. And now, somewhere on the wind, you hear the creak of ships. Something new is coming. The wind carries salt and something else, smoke maybe, or something older, something unsettled. You stand on a crumbling hill overlooking a coast you can't quite place. The water is too calm, the horizon too empty, and yet your spine prickles, because somewhere out there, past the edge of the waves, sails are rising. This is the dawn of the Sea Peoples. No one agrees exactly who they were. No records survive from them, just scattered mentions by the empires they helped destroy. Egyptians carved their name into stone in tight-lipped rage. Others didn't even get the chance. You turn toward a coastline lit with the last rays of twilight, and there, just visible against the dying light, are ships, dozens, maybe hundreds, not merchant vessels, not war galleys exactly, something in between, narrow, fast, efficient, filled with people who have no flag, no official homeland, and apparently no interest in diplomacy. What they do have are bronze weapons, hunger, and an uncanny talent for showing up when everyone else is weakest. You descend from your perch and enter what used to be a thriving port town, perhaps in Cyprus or the Levant. It doesn't really matter. They're all about to meet the same fate. The town smells of dust, old fish, and worry. The people have heard rumors. Villages inland already speak of disappearances, burned fields, and strangers who speak no known tongue. When the Sea Peoples arrive, there is no negotiation, just fire. Stone walls mean little to those who have burned cities before breakfast. You watch as defenders rally briefly. The archers loose their arrows. The spearmen hold their line. But the Sea Peoples are relentless. They don't just sack the town, they erase it. Historians still argue about the origin of these raiders. Were they displaced tribes from the Aegean, rebels from within the collapsing empires, climate refugees turned hostile by famine, or perhaps mercenaries turned pirates, hardened by war and loosed upon the world? The Egyptian pharaoh Ramses III, one of the few rulers to survive an encounter with them, described them in stone reliefs as a confederation of tribes, the Shurden, the Lukka, the Peliset, the Shekelesh, and others. They came from the midst of the sea, he wrote, with wagons and women and children in tow. This wasn't a raid. It was a migration with attitude. You peek around the ruins of a market square as the town falls. Smoke coils from the rooftops. A granary crumbles. Somewhere, someone is screaming in a language you don't recognize. The Sea Peoples don't linger. They take what they need, grain, bronze, captives, and vanish like mist over water. This wasn't just one town. It was dozens, maybe more. Archaeological layers across the Mediterranean show signs of fire and abandonment right around 1200 BCE. Sites in Greece, Anatolia, Syria, Canaan, and Egypt all tell the same story, a rolling tide of destruction. Here's a quirky tidbit. The Philistines, those biblical troublemakers, may have been one of the Sea Peoples. Some scholars believe they settled along the southern coast of Canaan after the collapse, eventually becoming a formidable local power. That means the sea peoples didn't vanish, they morphed. And yet somehow Egypt holds. Ramses III throws everything at them: ships, archers, chariots. The Battle of the Delta, depicted in elaborate reliefs at Medinet Habu, shows Egyptian forces pushing back the sea peoples in a rare moment of Bronze Age resilience. It's a costly victory. Egypt survives, but never quite recovers its former glory. You walk along the banks of the Nile now, past the massive temple walls etched with scenes of battle. Ramses stands taller than his enemies, smiting them with godlike calm. But if you squint, you can see the truth behind the propaganda. Egypt, though unbeaten, is tired. Its economy falters. Its borders shrink. The old gods grow silent. Because here's the secret that empires hate to admit. You don't need to lose a war to lose your place in history. Sometimes surviving is just a slower kind of falling. You travel inland now, following the trail of displaced peoples. You pass what used to be Hittite territory, nothing left but scorched earth and broken palaces. You skirt the ruins of Ugarit, where an entire library of cuneiform tablets lies buried beneath collapsed walls. In one of those tablets, unearthed centuries later, a scribe was writing about ship manifests and trade goods, just days before the city fell. Imagine dying mid-invoice. That's the kind of ending the sea peoples brought. But it wasn't just cities they burned, it was certainty. The Bronze Age world had been predictable, connected, interdependent. The sea peoples broke that chain. They introduced chaos, and in that chaos, new forms rose. You pause in a small village, years after the worst of the invasions. Children play with reed toys. Men and women build rough shelters from stone and thatch. The age of palaces is over for now, but people still laugh, still bake bread, still tell stories by firelight. And those stories start to change. The great civilizations that fell in silence are reborn as legend. Mycenae becomes the home of Agamemnon. Troy, which was real enough to burn, becomes a city of myth. The survivors repackage trauma into narrative. And somewhere in those campfire tales, the sea peoples become monsters, vague, unknowable, unstoppable. You stand now at the water's edge, staring out at the same sea from which they came. It's calm today, reflecting stars that weren't visible during the long nights of the collapse. The world is quieter now, simpler in a way. No great empires to call the shots. No global trade networks. Just small kingdoms, villages, and stories. But the silence isn't quite restful. It's the kind of silence that waits for something new to rise. The world is calmer now, or at least it pretends to be. The roaring collapse of the late Bronze Age has faded into a kind of dusty silence, the kind that clings to old stones and fatting myths. Trade has resumed in pockets. Languages evolve like ivy through ruins. And civilization, scrappy, battered, determined, is beginning to stitch itself back together. But you don't feel safe yet, not really. You walk through the marble halls of Byzantium, once the gleaming jewel of the Eastern Roman Empire. The streets smell of incense and wine and something sharper, like old sweat and damp wool. It's the 6th century CE, and Rome may have fallen in the West, but here in the East, things are still very much alive. Banners flutter, priests chant, bureaucrats bicker. The empire, in its twilight splendor, still dreams of forever. Then someone coughs. It's a wet, rattling sound from the shadows of the marketplace. You freeze, so does everyone else, because they've heard that cough before. They've seen what comes next. Welcome to the plague of Justinian, history's first recorded pandemic on a truly global scale. You probably won't survive this. You follow the trail of infection through crowded alleyways, past docked ships whose cargo holds hum with fleas and the quiet rustle of rats. The disease probably arrived via trade routes from Africa or the Near East, just another shipment of goods and death. One bite, one flea, one tiny bacterium. Yersinia pestis, the same pathogen that will later cause the Black Death. Only this time, it's arriving centuries early. And the world is entirely unprepared. You watch the fever take hold. It begins subtly. A headache, a chill, swollen lymph nodes, usually in the neck, armpit, or groin. Then comes the vomiting, the delirium, the blackening of the extremities. Some die within 2 days, others linger in misery. Doctors don't know what to do. They bleed the patient. They recite prayers. They light incense. It doesn't help. Within weeks, entire districts of Constantinople are silent. You step over bodies wrapped in linens. The Emperor Justinian himself falls ill, though he recovers, barely. Not everyone is so lucky. Some modern estimates suggest that this plague killed up to 25–50 million people across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, maybe a quarter of the known world's population. The scale is almost impossible to imagine. At the height of the outbreak in Constantinople, 5,000 people per day were reportedly dying. Some days it climbed to 10,000. Corpses piled up in churches. Mass graves overflowed. Eventually, they just started throwing bodies into the sea. You sit beside one of the plague pits now, the air thick with the iron-sweet stink of death. There's no birdsong, no bells, just the quiet creak of a cart dragging more loss to its resting place. And even now, even here, people are praying for forgiveness, for mercy, for any explanation at all. Historians still argue whether the plague of Justinian was truly a pandemic on par with the Black Death, or if the death tolls were inflated by fearful scribes. But the economic and political devastation is clear. Cities depopulate, trade collapses, the Byzantine military falters, agricultural production plummets, entire regions fall into disorder. And yet life doesn't stop. It limps, of course. The imperial dream falters. Justinian's ambitious plan to reunite the Eastern and Western Roman empires fizzles into ashes and logistical breakdowns. Some historians believe that had the plague not struck, Rome might have risen again under Byzantium's banner. But instead, the dream is buried with its carriers. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. The name Justinian became so tied to the plague that in some places, the disease was referred to simply as the Justinianic pestilence. Imagine living through a pandemic so legendary, they name it after your emperor. Not ideal branding. As the plague subsides, years later you walk through the ghost of a once thriving world. Some regions never quite recover. Villages become legends. Cities shrink into silence. But in others, a strange resilience blooms. New religious movements rise. Monasteries gain influence. Survivors rebuild not just physically, but spiritually. The plague didn't just kill people, it rewrote their worldviews. When mortality moves in, philosophy often follows. And something else emerges too, immunity. A quiet, unseen inheritance. Some people lived and their bodies remembered. That memory would pass on, quietly tucked into the genes of the future. You follow a young boy down a quiet lane in Antioch. His father died last spring, his mother last week, but he's alive. Lean, hollow-eyed, but alive. And he's learning to sew fishing nets just like his father did. The sea hasn't changed. The fish still bite. Some things endure. It's not heroic. There's no triumphant music. Just persistence, the everyday miracle of not dying. You glance across the Mediterranean now and the landscape has shifted again. Empires shrink, trade reroutes, borders blur, but humanity presses forward, less confident perhaps, but also more cautious, more aware of the things that travel with ships and silk and strangers. A few decades from now, people will tell stories of the pestilence, some accurate, others mythologized. A few will say it was divine punishment. Others will whisper of foul mists and poisoned wells. The truth, tiny, rod-shaped, and transmitted by flea bite, will be forgotten for over 1,000 years. And yet, even in the wake of mass death, the world does what it always does. It changes shape. Old systems collapse. New ones rise. The seeds of feudalism, monasticism, and future kingdoms are scattered in this post-plague soil. You sit beneath a fig tree and watch as a woman teaches her daughter to grind grain. Simple, rhythmic, necessary. Somewhere, the church is consolidating power. Somewhere else, nomads are establishing new roots through fragile empires. The big picture wobbles, but these little acts of survival hold the world together. This plague wasn't the end of days, just the end of comfort, the end of believing that tomorrow is guaranteed. And for a species that tends to learn best from disaster, that lesson stuck around for a while. You wake to a sky that shouldn't look like this. It's August, but the sun is a pale smudge behind a curtain of brownish haze. You step outside your modest thatched shelter, stone walls cool to the touch, fields crisp and withering, and it feels like early winter. But this isn't winter, it's something worse. It's 536 CE, and the air itself has turned against you. This is, according to many historians, the single worst year to be alive. You rub your arms, confused. The mornings are too cold, the crops aren't growing, the birds are quiet, and the daylight, it's wrong, dim, dull, like someone scraped the edges off the sun. Contemporary accounts say the sun gave forth its light without brightness like the moon during the whole year, and no one knows why. You walk through the village somewhere in the Roman world's brittle skeleton, maybe a former province now only nominally governed. People whisper about omens. Some blame sin. Others look skyward, afraid to name what they think they see. Something broke, they all agree, but no one knows what. We do now. Sort of. The culprit is most likely a volcanic eruption, or maybe several, or maybe a comet. Historians still argue. Ice core data from Greenland and Antarctica shows a massive sulfate spike around this time, evidence of a colossal volcanic blast, probably from somewhere in the northern hemisphere. Some suspect Iceland. Others point to Ilopango in Central America, or a mystery caldera that's still hiding in plain sight. Wherever it came from, the eruption spewed millions of tons of ash and sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere. These particles spread like a ghostly veil around the globe, scattering sunlight and triggering a volcanic winter. Temperatures dropped, crops failed, famine spread, and nobody knew it was volcanic. They just knew something was deeply, horribly wrong. You sit by a field of barley. It's stunted, yellowing. The farmer beside you mutters a prayer to saints who are probably overbooked. He's already lost half his yield. Next year might be worse. He doesn't know that it will be. You walk onward toward the center of the Byzantine Empire. Constantinople is still here, tarnished but functioning. Emperor Justinian, having narrowly survived the plague we just talked about, is now watching his empire starve. The roads are full of beggars and refugees. Grain shipments from Egypt are unreliable. Trade is choking. Diplomacy is strained. And the fog doesn't lift. In China, the Book of Wei records a yellow dust that rained from the sky and dimmed the sun for months. In Ireland, the annals mention a failure of bread. In the Middle East, Arabic chronicles note extreme cold, snow in summer, and trees that forgot how to bloom. Everywhere, the world is dimming, and fear is growing. Here's your quirky tidbit. The sun's strange behavior may have even influenced art and religion. Some scholars think this darkness inspired apocalyptic themes in medieval Christianity, or even helped fuel the rise of messianic movements. After all, nothing says repent quite like a sun that forgets how to shine. By 537, the famine is in full swing. And then, because nature never likes to leave a bad thing alone, it gets worse. In 541, just 5 years after the sun vanished, the plague of Justinian returns. Yes, again. It hits a population already weakened by hunger and despair. The death toll spikes again. Entire regions fall silent. It's not the end of the world, but it's starting to feel like it's giving it a real try. You're walking through a small village in what will one day be France. People gather in the churchyard, praying under leaden skis. A priest reads from worn scripture. No one listens. Not really. Their stomachs are too empty, their eyes too wide. They're waiting for the light to come back, but no one remembers what real light looks like anymore. And the cold lingers. 536 was the start, But 537, 538, 539 all worse. Crops fail year after year. In some places, winter comes in summer. Snow falls in China during the rice season. Livestock die. People eat bark, grass, clay. Cannibalism becomes more than a whispered rumor in some regions. Even when the sun returns, gradually, sheepishly, nothing goes back to normal. The Roman world is forever changed. The plague keeps revisiting. Economies buckle. Borders shift. Justinian's dreams of restoring the empire fully crumble into smoke, and in the cracks of the old order, new powers start to grow. This volcanic winter, quiet, slow, invisible, does what armies often fail to do. It redraws the map. The Avars move west. The Lombards enter Italy. The Saxons entrench deeper into former Roman Britain. And in the Arabian Peninsula, where trade routes have shifted and empires have weakened, a new religion is about to emerge within a century, one that will shape the entire future of the region. You walk beside a trader returning from a long, failed journey. His pack is light. The roads are emptier than usual. The towns he passed are thin with people. He doesn't know the name of the volcano or even what a volcano is, but he knows that the world changed in his lifetime, and not for the better. You sit with him as he makes a small fire and heats a thin soup made from dried roots and whatever he could scavenge. He offers you some. You don't decline. That would be rude. And as you eat, you look up. The sky is a dull, colorless gray, but somewhere, just barely, you can make out the sun again. A pale coin, weak but not gone. The world didn't end in 536, but it paused. It staggered. And for a few long years it forgot how to live. You're standing now on a cobbled street, just outside a two-story villa with bright frescoes and laughter echoing from its shaded courtyard. The air smells like olives, wine, and just the faintest hint of sulfur. Nothing alarming, just enough to wrinkle your nose. A merchant brushes past you with a basket of figs. Children chase a dog down a side alley. The sun is shining. There's no plague here, no empire in crisis, just a sleepy Roman town humming along under a blue Italian sky. Welcome to Pompeii, 79 CE. You probably won't survive this either. You wander into the forum where a group of toga-clad men debate something that seems important, grain prices, or maybe gossip. Their voices rise and fall in rhythm with the clatter of sandals on stone. The town bustles. Bakers fire their ovens. Glassmakers polish trinkets. Poets lounge in shaded corners, thinking about metaphors and lunch. And just behind it all, looming quietly over the rooftops, is Mount Vesuvius. You can see it clearly today, green, serene, deceptively shy. No one thinks of it as dangerous. It hasn't erupted in living memory. To the locals, it's just part of the scenery, the same way you don't fear a bookshelf until it falls on your head. You step inside one of the villas, opulent, airy, full of murals depicting gods, lovers, and mythic beasts. The walls are lined with shelves of scrolls. In Herculaneum, just a short walk away, one of these libraries will later be found carbonized but preserved, the only complete Greco-Roman library ever discovered. Of course, reading those scrolls will require lasers and luck, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. For now, the wine flows freely. The laughter is loud. The ground, however, is beginning to twitch. Just after noon on August 24th, or possibly October, depending on which calendar you trust, Vesuvius explodes. You don't hear it at first, you feel it. A deep guttural shudder in the earth followed by a booming roar that splits the sky open like a curtain. People freeze mid-step, birds vanish, dogs howl, then comes the ash. It doesn't fall like snow, it falls like doom, fast, hot, and thick enough to darken the midday sky in minutes. You try to run, but where? Everyone's running. The streets clog with panicked crowds, carts, animals, confused children. Somewhere, a temple bell rings out of sync, then stops. The volcano unleashes a Plinian eruption, named after Pliny the Younger, who watches the whole thing from across the bay and later writes it down in terrifying detail. His uncle, Pliny the Elder, sets off by ship to rescue people and observe the event, because even in the 1st century, scientists couldn't resist being too curious. He doesn't make it back. You're stumbling now through ash up to your knees, coughing, blinded. Roofs are collapsing under the weight. Lightning crackles in the volcanic cloud overhead, a boiling column of gas and rock that stretches over 30 kilometers into the sky. The cloud eventually collapses under its own weight, and when it does, it sends a series of pyroclastic surges, superheated gas and rock moving at over 100 km/h, racing down the mountain. These surges are not survivable. By the time they hit Pompeii, most people are already dead or dying, buried in ash, suffocated by toxic air, or crushed under their own homes. The surges cook the rest. Bodies are flash heated to the point where soft tissue vaporizes and skulls literally explode. It's sudden. It's final. You crouch behind a wall as the first surge approaches. It doesn't howl. It roars like a collapsing mountain. You feel the heat before it arrives. Then nothing. Centuries pass. When Pompeii is rediscovered in the 18th century, it's almost exactly as it was in those final moments. A city frozen in death, bread still sitting in ovens, dogs still chained in courtyards, a woman curled around her child, a man mid-step. It's not just ruins, it's a pause button pressed at the worst possible moment. Here's your quirky tidbit. In Herculaneum, the eruption actually carbonized the scrolls in the Villa of the Papyri. They were unreadable for centuries, but now, with AI and X-ray scanning, scientists are beginning to digitally unwrap them, layer by fragile layer, revealing lost works of philosophy, poetry, and maybe even completely unknown texts. It's a tragic time capsule, but it's also a library with a lava-proof security system. You walk through the ruins now. The ash has cooled, the dust has settled. The plaster casts of victims, created centuries later by pouring resin into the voids left by long-decayed bodies, lie silently in their last poses. Some cover their faces, others reach out. One clutches a small pouch, money maybe, or a keepsake. This eruption wasn't the end of the Roman world. Rome survived. The empire lumbered on. But it was the end of a very specific, very vibrant corner of it. A reminder that sometimes the gods are silent, the warnings go unnoticed, and the mountain you picnic on might just be your funeral. Historians debate whether the people of Pompeii understood the signs. Earthquakes had rattled the region for days. Springs dried up. Animals acted strangely. But without a cultural memory of volcanic catastrophe, the locals didn't connect the dots. Why would they? Vesuvius hadn't erupted for over 1,500 years. To them, it wasn't a killer. It was just there. You leave the city as it was found, covered in gray, still whispering with echoes of lives that almost slipped from memory entirely. The vines have returned. The sea laps quietly at the shore. Tourists take selfies with the ruins now, unbothered by the knowledge that another eruption will come someday. Vesuvius is still active, still grumbling. Because time, like the volcano, is patient. You walk now through a village you've seen before, or at least versions of it. Thatched roofs, wooden beams, chickens in the road, mud thick enough to swallow a sandal. Somewhere in Central Europe, perhaps, or England, or the Italian countryside. It's hard to tell. The world in the mid-14th century has shrunk again into familiar, earthen rhythms, planting, harvesting, gossiping, surviving. But not for long. There's a smell in the air, not just smoke or manure, something worse, something sharp and sour like rot mixed with fear. And over the next hill, there's a cart creaking toward town, piled with something you're not sure you want to see. You're in 1347, and the Black Death has just arrived. A single rat jumps from the cart as it passes you. It scampers into a stable. You never see it again, but its fleas, oh, they'll get around. A few tiny bites. That's all it takes. And within days, the world begins to die. You head toward the port of Messina, Sicily, where the plague made its European debut, carried on Genoese ships fleeing the siege of Kaffa in Crimea. Legend says the Mongol army catapulted infected corpses over the walls, inventing early biological warfare. Historians still argue whether that really happened or if it's just medieval gossip. But what is clear? The plague came fast and it came hungry. Within weeks, Messina is overrun. Bodies line the harbor, priests refuse to give last rites. Graves fill, then overflow, then vanish beneath new ones. The Black Death wasn't just one disease. It was a trilogy of horror. The most famous form, bubonic plague, caused painfully swollen lymph nodes, buboes, along with fever, chills, and vomiting. But there was also the pneumonic form, which spread through coughs and killed in 2 days. And the worst of all, septicemic, which could kill within hours, turning blood to sludge and skin to black. Hence the name. You're walking through a French town now. The shutters are closed, the church bells have stopped. A sign hangs on a door, no visitors, family ill. Behind the door, it's already too late. The mother is dead, the father delirious. The child coughing dark flecks onto a blanket. There's no help coming. And here's the thing, no one knows what's causing it. Some blame the stars. Others suspect bad air, divine punishment, or, you guessed it, minorities. Pogroms flare across Europe with Jews blamed for poisoning wells. It's baseless, it's brutal, it's depressingly familiar. You pass through a town in Germany where an entire community has been driven into a synagogue and burned alive. A group of doctors with beaked masks walks by, their robes flapping like grim wings. Inside their beaks, aromatic herbs and vinegar-soaked cloth, medieval air fresheners meant to purify the miasma. They mean well, they help no one. Quirky tidbit, the phrase "ring around the rosy" may have originated from this time, or so the legend goes. The rhyme's rosy is said to reference the rash, a pocket full of posies the herbs people carried, and we all fall down. Well, you get the idea. Historians still debate the connection, but the association lingers like a ghost. You watch monks dig mass graves outside London, each one deeper than the last. They bless the bodies sometimes. Other times, they just cover them with lime and dirt. In the end, even the clergy start dying. Entire monasteries vanish. 1 out of every 3 people in Europe dies, somewhere between 75 to 200 million people worldwide, depending on which estimates you trust. Let that number settle into your spine. 1/3, sometimes more. Families disappear. Entire villages go silent. Laws collapse. So do economies. Serfdom weakens because there simply aren't enough workers left to enforce it. Landowners start offering better wages. Laborers gain a sliver of power. The Black Death kills millions, but it also breaks medieval systems that seemed eternal. You sit beside a peasant boy, maybe 10 years old, who's just inherited 20 acres and a team of oxen because his entire family is gone. He's terrified, but he's also suddenly important. The land needs working, and he knows how to do it. The plague reshapes Europe not just biologically, but socially, economically, spiritually. Art turns darker. Skeletons dance in frescoes. Graveyards overflow with allegory. Writers like Boccaccio describe the dead stacked like firewood. Others fall silent, too exhausted to process what they've witnessed. And yet, once again, you notice the strange resilience of humans. They rebuild, slowly, awkwardly. With coughing still echoing through the valleys, people begin to marry again, trade again, plan again. Birth rates spike. Land is plentiful. In some places, there's even a weird boom. A sense of we made it and now it's time to live fast, eat well, and maybe write really long, strange poetry. The medical world learns very little. The germ theory of disease is still centuries away, but public health begins to emerge. Cities form quarantine laws. Ships must wait outside harbors. Officials create plague doctors, hire pest houses, and monitor the sick. You can almost see the faint outline of modern epidemiology starting to form. Blurred, yes, but real. You walk now through Florence, once ravaged by death, now roaring back to life. Art flourishes, wealth circulates. In some strange, bleak twist, the Black Death may have helped kickstart the Renaissance. When the world breaks, sometimes it comes back stronger, weirder too. And in the distance, on another ship, another rat carries a new set of fleas. Because this isn't the last time the plague will visit, not even close. You step into a world that should be blooming, but isn't. The year is 1816 and it's supposed to be summer in Europe. Birds should be singing, wheat should be waving, children should be running barefoot through sun-warmed fields. But instead, the skies are gray, the fields are bare, and the wind carries a damp chill that gnaws straight through your bones. You rub your arms. Are those snowflakes? Yes, in June. This is the year without a summer, and while it may not look like the end of the world, it certainly feels like a dress rehearsal. You walk through a village in Switzerland, the kind where cowbells usually echo through valleys green with clover. But now the pastures are muddy. The cows are hungry, the people are desperate. Clouds hang low like damp wool. Days pass without sunlight. And it's not just here, this is happening across Europe, North America, and Asia. Crops have failed, again and again. The cause, it's not war, it's not disease, it's a volcano. Specifically, Mount Tambora, which erupted in Indonesia in 1815, just 1 year earlier. You didn't hear it, of course, unless you were within 1,000 kilometers, in which case your ears are probably still ringing. But the rest of the planet soon felt its fury in other ways. Tambora was a monster of an eruption, possibly the largest in recorded history. It launched an estimated 160 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere, injecting a cloud of sulfur dioxide so vast it circled the globe. The result? A volcanic winter, just like 536 CE, but this time with newspapers and angry letters. You pass a baker's stall in northern France. There's no bread, not today. The rye didn't come in, the wheat rotted, and the prices have tripled. The baker shrugs. What can she do? You move on, stomach growling, and overhear someone muttering that this is God's punishment. Another blames sunspots. Another, the British. Historians still argue over how much blame belongs to Tambora alone. Some suggest a perfect storm of climate anomalies, volcanic dust, a declining solar cycle, and El Niño patterns. But Tambora was the spark. The sulfur veil it left behind reduced global temperatures by as much as 3 degrees C in some areas. That may not sound like much, but it's enough to rewrite weather systems, destroy harvests, and plunge whole continents into chaos. In New England, you walk through fields frosted white in mid-June. Farmers try to replant, then give up. Snow falls again in July. By August, people are grinding seed corn into meal and eating boiled weeds. Some are boiling shoe leather. It's a grim culinary time. Back in Europe, famine spreads like mold. Riots break out. Grain silos are looted. In Switzerland, a lake freezes over in the middle of what should be summer. In Ireland, rainwater ruins peat stores and triggers a mini-famine years before the famous one. Even India isn't spared. Monsoons are disrupted, leading to crop failure and outbreaks of cholera that sweep across the continent. But amid this cold, gray despair, something strange begins to stir. You find yourself in a dark villa overlooking Lake Geneva. It's raining, of course, it's always raining, and inside a small group of friends is trying to entertain themselves. There, Lord Byron, dramatic and shirtless. There's Percy Bysshe Shelley, moody and brilliant. And there, Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, 18 years old, staring into the fireplace with something wild in her eyes. They challenge each other to write ghost stories. Byron dashes something off. Percy paces. But Mary, she begins to write about a man who plays God, a scientist who reanimates the dead in a flash of lightning. Frankenstein is born, not just the monster, but the whole idea of science and consequence. Without this volcanic winter, without this moody, trapped summer, we might never have met Victor Frankenstein or his creation. Your quirky tidbit for this chapter. Some historians believe the spectacular red sunsets caused by Tambora inspired J.M.W. Turner's most vivid paintings, those eerie, fiery skies that now hang in museums. Beauty, born from ash. Back on the roads, you pass migrants on foot, entire families walking away from failed farms towards cities they hope have food. Many don't make it. In the chaos, thousands immigrate. Some head to America, some to Canada. Towns like Geneva, New York, and Frankfurt, Indiana owe their founding in part to Tambora's sulfur shadow. And yet, as with every time the world nearly ends, the map doesn't just collapse, it shifts. Societies adapt. Agriculture evolves. In response to food shortages, people begin preserving more food, developing better grain storage, and tracking weather with obsessive care. Scientists start to wonder whether volcanoes can change the climate, planting the first seeds of modern climatology. You're walking now beside a young woman in Germany, notebook in hand. She's trying to sketch a new way to record daily temperatures, something more systematic. A few valleys over, a chemist wonders if gas can hold heat. A few decades later, that idea becomes the greenhouse effect. Unintended consequences again, just a different flavor. Even the literature of the time changes. The cold summer of 1816 ushers in darker, moodier, more introspective themes. The Gothic novel spikes in popularity. Romanticism swells. Nature becomes not just beautiful but unpredictable, something to be feared as well as admired. You stand at the edge of a field in Bavaria now. The frost has lifted and tiny shoots of green are finally appearing. A farmer stares at them like they might vanish. He crosses himself. So does his wife. No one says the word Tambora here. They just call it the year the sun forgot. It's 1817. The skis are clearing, slowly, but things will never go quite back to the way they were. The trauma sticks. The migration trails stay carved. The children born in this cold, gray year will grow up with stories of hunger and strangeness, passed down like old keys in a drawer. And far away in Indonesia, Mount Tambora sleeps again, its crater a massive wound still steaming quietly in the sun. Because that's the thing about volcanoes, they only look peaceful from far away. You look up at the sky, expecting more ash, more gloom, more of the soft, gray disasters you've grown used to. But this time, the sky fights back. It's 1859 and the stars seem restless tonight. You're standing on the edge of a wheat field in England, watching strange lights flicker across the northern horizon. Not candles, not lanterns. They shimmer green, red, gold colors that don't belong there. The locals think it's divine or demonic. You just stare. Because this is the beginning of the Carrington event, the most powerful geomagnetic storm ever recorded. And it's about to make the modern world, such as it is, very uncomfortable. You turn to the east, where the early morning light is just starting to brush the sky, and notice something wrong with the telegraph office. Sparks, the kind that shouldn't be there. The operator inside is shouting, not from pain, but from astonishment. His equipment just shocked him through the desk. Sparks flew from the wires. And then, just as weird, it kept working without a power source. For hours, you've entered the electric era, before it knew how fragile it was. The Carrington event was caused by a solar flare, a massive burst of charged particles from the sun, flung into space like a fireball. Most flares miss us entirely. This one did not. It arrived in just 17.6 hours, screaming past Mercury and into Earth's magnetic field, where it cracked the sky open. The man who saw it first, Richard Carrington, an astronomer in England, watched dark spots on the sun explode into a blinding white flash. He called it a white light solar flare, the first ever recorded. He had no idea it was about to punch the Earth in the magnetosphere. You walk through city streets lit by a ghostly aurora, not just in Iceland or Alaska, at the equator. People in Cuba and Colombia report red-green streaks in the sky. Miners in Colorado wake up, thinking it's morning. Newspaper editors in Boston start typesetting by aurora light. The skies are too bright to sleep. Meanwhile, the telegraph systems are in chaos. You step into an office in New York where operators are yanking wires off their desks like they're wrangling electric eels. Machines buzz and spit ink. Some catch fire. Others transmit ghost messages, strange static and incomprehensible words. At least one system continues to function after being disconnected from any power source. Historians still argue whether the equipment was truly that unstable, or if the operators just panicked and overreacted. Either way, the result was a brief technological meltdown at a time when the world had just begun to rely on long-distance communication. Now here's your quirky tidbit. One telegraph operator reported being electrocuted through the ear by his headset. Not fatally, but still, probably made him rethink his career options. And for those keeping track, that's possibly the first recorded case of a man being shocked in the head by the sun. The flare didn't just impact humans. Animals panicked. Birds flew in strange spirals. Migrating geese veered off course. Even compasses gave up. Some spun uselessly, others pointed straight into the ground. For a few days, magnetic north became more of a suggestion. And yet once again you notice what didn't happen. No cities fell, no food riots, no empires collapsed. Because in 1859 we were only just starting to become vulnerable. There were no satellites to fry, no power grids to fail, no GPS, no smartphones, no stock markets built on Wi-Fi and caffeine. The Carrington event was terrifying, yes, but it was also a lucky preview. If it happened today, different story. Modern scientists estimate that a Carrington-level event now would knock out satellites, navigation systems, and electric grids across entire continents. Some regions might be without power for weeks, even months, depending on how far the damage spread and how fried the transformers got. Supply chains would break, banking systems would crash, planes could go blind in the sky. A study once estimated the global economic impact of a repeat Carrington event at $1-2 trillion in the first year alone. That's with a T. You sit on a grassy hill, watching auroras dance overhead like the sky's having a party without you. They're beautiful, yes, but also eerie. You've seen enough by now to know that beauty can precede disaster, the calm before the fried motherboard. Scientists are watching the sun now more than ever. Satellites like SOHO and Parker's solar probe track solar activity, hopping to give us a few hours warning before the next big one. And it will come. The sun doesn't care about your email backups. Solar maximums occur roughly every 11 years. We're in one now. All it takes is one well-aimed CME, coronal mass ejection, to give your toaster a personality and your Wi-Fi an existential crisis. But for now, in 1859, the world simply marvels. You walk back into the wheat field, still lit with the alien glow of the magnetic storm. Somewhere across the Atlantic, a sailor on a British naval ship writes about the eerie red glow above the waves. He doesn't know why it's happening. He thinks it might be divine. Maybe it is. The skies quiet after a few days. The telegraph wires cool, the auroras fade. People go back to normal mostly. The Carrington event becomes a curiosity, an oddity, a paragraph in an old astronomy journal. Forgotten, ignored. But not by everyone. You walk beside a young scientist now, staring at sunspots through a filtered lens. He's worried. The machines we've built are too delicate. The systems we rely on, so clever, so convenient, are built on the assumption that the sky will behave itself. But the sun doesn't sign contracts. And it definitely doesn't ask permission. You don't hear the alarms at first. No sirens, no klaxons, just the soft ticking of a clock on a Soviet bunker wall, and the steady, unhurried breathing of a man who might just be the reason you're still alive. It's September 26, 1983. The Cold War has entered one of its most dangerous phases. Tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union are razor-thin, sharpened by rhetoric, weapons testing, and mutual suspicion. Just 3 weeks earlier, the Soviets shot down Korean Airlines Flight 7, mistaking it for a U.S. spy plane. 269 people died. And now, a satellite system in Moscow has picked up something far worse. Incoming nuclear missiles. Well, maybe. You stand in the Serpukhov 15 Early Warning Center, a squat, windowless facility southeast of Moscow where Stanislav Petrov, a 44-year-old Soviet lieutenant colonel, is on shift. He looks tired, not panicked, just tired. It's 12:14 a.m. when the alarm starts. The screen lights up. One ICBM launched. From the United States, according to the computer anyway. Then 4 more. 5 total incoming. The standard protocol is clear. Report the detection up the chain of command. Moscow would likely initiate a full nuclear retaliation, a strike that would send missiles flying toward U.S. targets, sparking a chain reaction of planetary obliteration. But Petrov hesitates. He thinks, he frowns. He doesn't press the button. He reasons that if the U.S. were actually launching a first strike, it wouldn't be just 5 missiles. It would be hundreds, thousands, enough to ensure total annihilation. This doesn't feel like that. And so Stanislav Petrov, the man with the clipboard, the quiet career, the average Soviet haircut, decides to do nothing. And saves the world. Because, of course, the alerts were false. A computer glitch triggered by sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds above Montana. The system read it as missile launches. There were no missiles, no attack, just faulty code, physics, and a man willing to think before reacting. Historians still argue how close we really came to nuclear war that night. Some say the Soviet leadership might have demanded more proof before retaliating. Others believe Petrov's hesitation made the critical difference. What's not debated? Without his decision, we might not be here to debate anything at all. You sit beside him now in the bunker. He scribbles notes on a clipboard, his hand shaking slightly. Later, when asked why he didn't follow protocol, he shrugs and says, "I had a feeling." He also says the system was raw, new, untested, prone to error. But mostly, he just didn't think it made sense. No one congratulates him. In fact, his decision is so far off book, it's buried. He isn't punished, but he's certainly not celebrated. He retires quietly, lives in a modest Moscow flat. Years later, after the story emerges, he receives international praise, but by then, he's just an old man with a haunted expression and the polite bafflement of someone who didn't think he did anything special. Your quirky tidbit. Petrov was reportedly reprimanded not for ignoring the alert, but for not properly logging the event in the official duty journal. Bureaucracy remains undefeated. You walk outside the bunker into a world that never knew how close it came to blinking out. The trees are still standing, the birds are still singing, and above you, the satellites are still watching. Because even though this near apocalypse was averted, the danger didn't end. If anything, it escalated. Just 2 months later, in November 1983, NATO conducted Able Archer 83, a military exercise simulating a coordinated nuclear attack. The simulation was so realistic, so well-timed, that the Soviets reportedly believed it might be cover for a real first strike. They prepared their forces, moved warheads, stared down the abyss again. Only through sheer chance, and perhaps a little fear fatigue, did both sides back down. You walk now through the halls of the Pentagon, then the Kremlin, then the homes of suburban families in Kansas and Kiev alike, places where people had no idea their existence depended on a single man in a windowless room, deciding not to believe the blinking red screen in front of him. And this is what's so strange about near-apocalypses in the nuclear age. They're quiet. There are no tidal waves, no fiery skis, no roars from above. Just a few lights on a panel, a wrongly parsed radar return, a phone that rings or doesn't. The Cold War was full of moments like this. Another notable one occurred in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when a Soviet submarine near Cuba, convinced they were under attack, nearly launched a nuclear torpedo. They needed 3 officers to agree. 2 said yes. One, Vasily Arkhipov, said no. So many near misses. So many moments where the world tilted, wobbled, and caught itself, barely. You sit now in a quiet field in 1983, the stars above you unchanged. The grass rustles. A rabbit hops past, blissfully unaware. You think about all the things that almost weren't. The books, the cities, the music, the conversations, the perfectly imperfect mess of humanity that almost vanished because of a false alarm and itchy fingers. And you remember Stanislav Petrov, sitting at his desk, watching the lights and choosing not to end everything. The world didn't explode, but it didn't learn either. Thousands of nuclear warheads still exist today. Dozens are still on hair-trigger alert. Systems are still vulnerable to false readings, cyber attacks, and human error. We've danced this dance before. We're still dancing. But tonight, at least, the dance floor is quiet. The alarms are silent. The world is still here. You open your eyes to a tropical breeze and the soft lap of waves against coral. A coconut drops nearby. A gull cries overhead. It's almost peaceful. Until the island shakes. This is Bikini Atoll, and it's about to become one of the most violently misunderstood places on the planet. You're standing on a stretch of sand that looks like paradise, but is quietly laced with radioactive dust. Welcome to 1954, and welcome to Castle Bravo, the nuclear test that turned a pretty little island into an accidental cautionary tale. You blink in the sun as soldiers string up observation equipment. Cameras hum. Scientists bark orders, and several dozen islanders who lived here until recently are now long gone, relocated to temporary homes that will become less temporary than anyone admits. And in the middle of it all, squatting atop a steel tower, is a thermonuclear device the U.S. military nicknamed Shrimp. Don't let the name fool you. Castle Bravo was the first dry-fuel hydrogen bomb, and it was expected to yield 6 megatons, already absurd by any human scale. It ended up producing 15 megatons. That's 2.5 times more than anticipated. And nobody was ready. You watch the countdown through binoculars from a supposedly safe distance. Then, flash. It's not even a sound at first. It's a white, a consuming, retina-burning, time-shattering flash that outshines the sun. For a moment, the ocean turns to steam. The air tears itself apart. The sky becomes a gaping wound. Then the noise comes. A sound so deep it doesn't vibrate your ears. It vibrates your bones. The shockwave hits like a slap from a vengeful god. You stagger backward. Birds fall from the sky. Fish boil. The blast gouges a crater a mile wide and vaporizes 3 small islands entirely. You don't hear anything else for a while. But the story doesn't end with a bang. Within hours, radioactive fallout begins to drift. High-altitude winds carry it far beyond what anyone calculated. The test's designers got the wind direction wrong, and in the words of one later report, the bomb worked too well. Ash begins to fall on U.S. servicemen on observation ships and tragically on the Japanese fishing boat Lucky Dragon No. 5, which was 85 miles away. The crew watched the flash. Then the snow fell. They touched it, breathed it, thought it was harmless. It was. They developed acute radiation sickness. One man, Eikichi Kubayama, died within months. He became a reluctant symbol, the first victim of the hydrogen bomb, and an unwanted echo of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And you're standing in a fallout zone where safe is a word that gets redefined every 5 minutes. You walk back toward the command tent, where stunned officials are still trying to understand what just happened. Castle Bravo was supposed to be a technical success, and in one sense it was. The bomb worked, just too well. The crater it left behind was so radioactive, Scientists couldn't enter it for months. And the people of Bikini Atoll, still exiled, still waiting. Here's your quirky tidbit. The name Bikini lives on in a much weirder fashion. In a marketing stunt of breathtaking tone deafness, French designer Louis Réard named his new two-piece swimsuit the Bikini just days after the tests, claiming it would be explosive in popularity. It was. The people of Bikini were not consulted. Back on the island, you watch as Geiger counters click louder than cicadas. Scientists in lab coats collect sand, fish, coconut husks. They'll later find that Castle Bravo contaminated more than 7,000 square miles of ocean. It spread plutonium, cesium-137, and strontium-90, names that sound like supervillains and act like them too. Historians still argue whether the test was a catastrophic failure or just an inevitable step in the Cold War arms race. The truth is both. Castle Bravo showed that hydrogen bombs weren't just big. They were uncontrollable, unpredictable, and capable of rendering entire regions uninhabitable. You walk with a marine biologist decades later. He's studying coral regrowth near the blast crater. Some forms of life are returning slowly, hesitantly, but others, gone for good. The atoll, once home to families, is now a glowing scar. And it's not alone. Castle Bravo was just one of 67 nuclear tests conducted in the Marshall Islands between 1946 and 1958. That's one test every 6.7 weeks, each with its own fallout, its own political fallout, and its own lingering ghosts. The Cold War was never quiet, but out here in the Pacific, it was louder than most will ever understand. You sit with an elder from the displaced Bikinians. He tells you that they were promised they could return soon, that their exile was temporary, that the ocean would cleanse itself. He stares out across the lagoon, now perfectly still, and says nothing else. The world didn't end at Castle Bravo, but it learned briefly just how easy it could be to end entire places, entire histories. And yet, as always, life presses on. Today, some parts of Bikini Atoll have signs warning tourists of radiation risk. Others are monitored for cesium. A few daredevils dive the lagoon's wrecks, oblivious or dismissive of the fallout legacy. The coral glows under the surface, as if pretending it was never burned. And in a climate-controlled vault somewhere, film reels of the test flicker in black and white silence. A mushroom cloud, a wave, a name. Shrimp. You exhale. The bomb has gone off. The world is still here. The night sky looks ordinary. You've seen this scene before countless times in countless eras. A dark dome scattered with stars, indifferent as ever. You tilt your head. Mars is up. A satellite glides by. Somewhere, someone's watching Netflix and someone else is watching the moon. Nobody sees it coming. Because asteroids don't phone ahead. The date is June 14, 2002, and an object the size of a 10-story building, about 73 meters wide, is slicing past Earth at 34,000 miles per hour. It misses you by a whisper, cosmically speaking, just 75,000 miles away. That's about one-third the distance to the moon. Its name, assigned after the fact, is 2002 MN. Not exactly poetic, but that's how you know it wasn't expected. You don't give names to things you're watching. You give names to things that just screamed past your face. The real kicker, you didn't even spot it until 3 days later. That's right. Earth got sideswiped by a space rock large enough to flatten a city, and nobody noticed until it was already gone. You walk through an observatory now. The researchers are sheepish. They have excuses, of course. It approached from the direction of the sun, the worst possible angle. Telescopes can't see much in daylight, and radar stations didn't catch it. There are only so many eyes scanning the sky, and most of them are focused on things that aren't moving at catastrophic velocity. And that's the unnerving truth. Our planet is buzzing with near misses. Asteroids, comets, cosmic debris, most of them harmless, most of them small, but a few are city killers, or worse. You hike through the Tunguska forest now, well, what's left of it. In 1908, a smaller asteroid, probably around 50 meters wide, entered Earth's atmosphere above Siberia and exploded midair with the energy of 1,000 Hiroshima bombs. It flattened over 800 square miles of forest. The trees still lie in radial patterns, scorched and snapped like matchsticks. Had it arrived 4 hours later, it would have leveled St. Petersburg. You sit on a fallen log staring up at a patch of cloudless sky. There's no crater, no impact site, just silence. Because that's how these things work. Sometimes there's a flash. Sometimes there's only a gap where something used to be. Back to 2002 MN. You run some numbers. Had it hit Earth, maybe an ocean, maybe a continent, it wouldn't have triggered a dinosaur-level extinction. But it could have vaporized downtown Chicago, or unleashed a tsunami, or disrupted the power grid. It was large enough to be catastrophic, small enough to be undetected. Historians don't argue about whether we're vulnerable to asteroid impacts. They just argue about when the next one will hit, and how badly we'll handle it. You're sitting now in a conference room at NASA's Planetary Defense Coordination Office. The title sounds like a sci-fi joke, but they're deadly serious. Their job: find, track, and hopefully deflect any object that might be headed Earth's way. They track thousands of near-Earth objects, or NEOs, ranging in size from pebbles to planetenders. And here's your quirky tidbit. Earth is hit by about 100 tons of space dust and debris every day. It's like living under a constant, gentle meteor shower. Most of it burns up in the atmosphere, but some doesn't. You peek over a shoulder as a NASA technician runs simulations. One shows an asteroid slipping past us in 2029, Apophis, once feared to strike, now downgraded. Another blip, smaller, less predictable, skirts into the "we'll worry about that later" category. There's even a growing plan: DART, the Double Asteroid Redirection Test, which successfully slammed a spacecraft into an asteroid in 2022, changing its orbit. It was our first real attempt at planetary defense, the kind of thing that would have been science fiction just 2 decades ago. You raise an eyebrow. It worked. Barely, but still it worked. And yet the uncomfortable truth remains. Most of the sky is still unsupervised. Only about 40% of city-sized NEOs have been found. Less than 1% of the smaller, but still dangerous ones. The kind that wouldn't wipe out humanity, but would make a spectacular mess of your Tuesday. You fly now over Chelyabinsk, Russia. In 2013, a 20-meter meteor exploded in the atmosphere with the force of 30 Hiroshima bombs. No one saw it coming. It shattered windows across 6 cities and injured over 1,000 people, mostly from broken glass and sheer confusion. You land in a quiet neighborhood where the shockwave caved in roofs and sent car alarms wailing. The crater it left in a frozen lake looks almost playful, a neat little hole in the ice. But the event was anything but cute. And if the meteor had entered at a slightly different angle, it might have reached the ground intact. That's what makes these near misses so eerie. They don't feel like threats. They feel like coincidences, like background radiation, like luck. But they are reminders. You walk now through a museum in Arizona, standing on the rim of meteor crater, formed 50,000 years ago by an iron asteroid just 50 meters wide. The impact created a crater over a mile across and 550 feet deep. That's the power of a cosmic pebble. Now look up again, at the stars, at the space between the stars. No warning lights, no countdown, just a lot of very fast rocks minding their own business. For now. So you sit back, under the open sky, and think about how many times you've nearly been erased by something you didn't even see coming. The asteroid that missed by 1/3 of a moon. The one that vaporized a forest. The ones we'll only notice when they're already arriving. And still the sky looks peaceful. Because it always does. Right up until it is. You shuffle into a dimly lit basement. There are canned beans stacked 6 feet high, crates of bottled water, a pile of expired iodine tablets, and a jittery man in a windbreaker explaining why the world is going to end in approximately 13 hours and 42 minutes. Welcome to December 31, 1999, and welcome to the digital apocalypse that was. This is Y2K, the year 2000 bug, the moment when humanity collectively decided that the thing most likely to destroy civilization wasn't nuclear war, or plague, or a rock from space, but bad date formatting. You sit beside a beige desktop computer, the kind with a humming fan and a mouse that still has a rubber ball inside. The screen shows a blinking cursor and a spreadsheet program that would make your eyes bleed. Somewhere deep inside its programming, dates are stored using only 2 digits, so 1999 is just 99. And 2000, well, that's. Which means the computer, in theory, might think the year is 1900. That wouldn't be such a big deal unless the system is controlling a bank, or an air traffic control tower, or a nuclear launch silo. You know, minor details. By the late 1990s, panic is slowly, then quickly, building. Y2K becomes shorthand for total systemic collapse. Newspapers run headlines about planes falling from the sky, elevators stopping mid-floor, ATMs eating cards, and satellites spiraling into the void. Evangelists declare it divine punishment. Programmers declare it a terrifying oversight. Historians still argue whether the panic was justified, or if the resulting lack of disaster just proves that the response worked. Because, oh yes, there was a response. You walk into a cramped office somewhere in Washington, D.C., where a group of engineers is gulping coffee and rewriting millions of lines of code under flickering fluorescent lights. This was the real Y2K effort. Tens of thousands of IT professionals working overtime to audit, patch, and test every piece of software from hospital mainframes to vending machines. It wasn't glamorous. It was just really, really tedious. But it may have saved the world from a very stupid kind of meltdown. You switch scenes to the Sydney Harbor Bridge, lit up for the New Year's countdown. Fireworks erupt, people cheer. The year ticks over from 99 to 0, and nothing explodes. No ATMs spark, no planes fall, no fridge doors swing open screaming. The lights stay on. The networks stay connected. And millions of people, many of whom have filled their bathtubs with water just in case, awkwardly open their front doors and admit that was fine. You sit with a man who stockpiled dried lentils and now has a lentil-based food strategy for the next 11 years. He sighs, shrugs, and quietly rejoins civilization. Here's your quirky tidbit. In Japan, a few minor systems did glitch. A nuclear power plant in Onagawa reported some sensors failing, but nothing dangerous. In the UK, some parking meters stopped working. In the US, a few cash registers spat out the wrong date. Nothing caught fire. You walk into a school gymnasium in Nebraska, where a group of doomsday preppers had gathered for a New Year's Eve shelter-in-place dance. They're playing ABBA. The air is heavy with regret. But the psychological shadow of Y2K was real. Governments had published preparedness manuals. Billions were spent on mitigation. People hoarded food, water, flashlights. Children asked if Santa would still come. Evangelical leaders wrote entire books about the end of days via corrupted databases. The idea that the world's infrastructure could be undone by a date stamp lodged itself deep into the cultural bloodstream. You pause beside a fax machine in a small-town police station that, somewhere around midnight, printed a full page of gibberish and then simply caught fire. Was it Y2K, or just a regular fax machine tantrum? Either way, it became legend. And then, as always, the fear passed. You walk through January 1st, 2000, and the world looks suspiciously unchanged. Stock markets open. Coffee brews. The internet hums along. People blink at the sunrise and feel kind of embarrassed. But here's the strange thing. The Y2K effort actually worked. The reason disaster didn't happen was because people spent years fixing it. In the US alone, the government and private sector spent an estimated $100 billion on testing and updates. Globally, closer to $500 billion. It was one of the largest and most successful coordinated technological efforts in history. So yes, nothing happened, but only because everything happened beforehand. You sit beside one of those caffeine-powered programmers now, his desk littered with empty soda cans and printouts. He was mocked for months, then praised for a week, then forgotten. His job was to make sure the world didn't notice the rollover. He succeeded, which means he'll never get credit. And the lesson? Sometimes the greatest disasters are the ones we never see, because someone already fixed them. You walk outside. The year 2000 dawns golden and uneventful. The world moves on to newer, shinier fears. .com crashes, terrorism, reality TV. Y2K is relegated to punchlines and documentaries. But you don't forget. You remember that the apocalypse doesn't always wear a mushroom cloud or a comet tail. Sometimes, it wears glasses and types COBOL in a dim cubicle at 3 a.m. And sometimes it's averted, not by heroes but by sysadmins. You wake to the low hum of fluorescent lights and the faint smell of overheated metal. There's a clipboard hanging from the wall, a warning sign with too many acronyms, and a desk where two men in uniform are sipping coffee that's been reheated too many times. Welcome to March 28, 1979. You're at 3 Mile Island, and it's going to be a very long day. You wander through the control room of reactor number 2, where dials blink, gauges twitch, and alarms have a nasty habit of sounding just slightly too late. It starts like all near-apocalypses do, not with an explosion, not with fire, but with a misunderstood warning and a stuck valve. A minor malfunction, a hiccup, that's all it takes. At 4:00 a.m., a relief valve meant to regulate pressure fails to close, allowing coolant to escape from the reactor core. The operators don't see it. The valve's light indicates that it's closed because that light is tied to the switch position, not the valve's actual function. In truth, the coolant is draining away like water from a broken sink, and the core is starting to overheat. But the alarms aren't screaming, yet. The operators see pressure rising and assume there's too much water, not too little. So they do what any sensible team trained in outdated procedures would do. They turn off the emergency cooling system. You watch it happen with that creeping dread you get when someone starts a kitchen fire by trying to boil water with a blowtorch. The core is exposed. The temperature rises. The fuel rods begin to melt. And still, no one outside the control room has any idea. You step out into the Pennsylvania morning near the town of Middletown. People are waking up, stretching, pouring coffee. Kids are getting ready for school. Birds are chirping. And 30 seconds later, radioactive gas is venting into the atmosphere. Just a small, controlled release, officials say later. Very minor, perfectly safe. Don't panic. People panic anyway. News spreads slowly, then all at once. By the next day, radio stations are reporting a nuclear accident. Journalists arrive. So do protesters. So do parents with packed suitcases. The word meltdown starts getting thrown around like it belongs in the weather report. The public wants answers. The plant managers want plausible deniability. The scientists want more data. The politicians want less blame. You stand in the middle of it all, watching as truth dissolves into a cloud of uncertainty, only slightly less toxic than the one rising from the cooling tower. Here's your quirky tidbit. President Jimmy Carter, a former nuclear engineer, actually visited the site in person to calm fears. He toured the control room in a protective suit and gave a carefully worded speech to reassure the public that everything was under control, which was mostly true by then. But for 16 hours, the reactor teetered on the edge of a full meltdown. A literal core breach, the kind that melts through steel and concrete and enters the realm of nightmare scenarios with names like China Syndrome, which, ironically, was also a Hollywood film released just 12 days earlier. Subtle universe. Historians still argue how close we really came. Some say the damage was contained, and that only a partial meltdown occurred. Others point out that nearly half of the reactor core melted, and that only a combination of good luck and late intervention prevented a disaster orders of magnitude worse. You walk with a resident of Middletown. She's packing her car. Her dog is in the backseat. She doesn't know if she'll be allowed to come home. Her neighbor has already left. Her husband says she's overreacting. The government says evacuation is voluntary. She goes anyway. Eventually, over 140,000 people evacuate. Some stay away for days. Others never return. You sit with the plant's cleanup team months later as they begin the slow, tedious, eye-watering process of removing radioactive water, damaged fuel, and melted reactor parts. It takes 14 years and over $1 billion to finish. Even then, the plant's reputation and the public's trust isn't fully restored. 3 Mile Island became a turning point, not just for nuclear policy but for public perception. The nuclear industry, already skating on a razor's edge of optimism, gets shoved into a defensive crouch. New power plants are canceled, regulations tighten. The phrase nuclear safety becomes both a mantra and a punchline. Environmentalists gain traction, protests swell, and in the decades that follow, energy policy veers toward anything that doesn't involve glowing metal and Geiger counters. You visit a high school science class in 1980. The teacher is explaining half-lives and fallout. A student raises their hand and asks if a microwave can explode. The line between nuclear and scary is now very, very blurry. And yet, for all its fear, 3 Mile Island was Chernobyl. No one died in the immediate incident. Radiation exposure to the public was likely minimal, comparable to a chest X-ray. But the psychological damage, immense. Confidence in nuclear energy was cracked, maybe permanently. The real meltdown was trust. You step outside the plant gates now, years later. The towers are still standing. One reactor, Unit 1, actually kept operating until 2019. The other, the one that nearly went critical, sits cold and silent, its scars hidden behind walls of concrete and bureaucracy. And it's a reminder that sometimes the end of the world comes not with a mushroom cloud or a missing asteroid, but with a stuck valve, a sleepy operator, and a manual that forgot to include Step 3. The systems we build are only as safe as the people who watch them. And people, well, they blink. So you stand once more in the shadow of cooling towers, listening to the wind and the low hum of nothing happening. This time at least, the silence isn't deadly. The air is heavy, not with smoke or sulfur this time, but with heat. The slow, creeping kind that doesn't roar in your ears or burst through the crust of the earth, but that settles in your lungs, wraps around your body, and refuses to leave. You're not in a singular moment of disaster now. There's no bright flash, no countdown clock, just the soft hiss of fans, the glare of distant wildfires, the blip of satellite data saying the same thing again and again. The world is warming. And unlike a volcano or an asteroid, this time we're doing it ourselves. You're walking through a city, any city, Phoenix, Karachi, Rome, doesn't matter. The pavement is too hot to touch. The air conditioning is humming like an industrial choir. A dog pants beside a sidewalk cafe that has long since closed because, let's be honest, nobody wants to sip espresso when it's 117 degrees in the shade. Welcome to the Anthropocene slow burn apocalypse, climate change. This one didn't sneak up on us. We've been writing it down since the 19th century, when scientists like Svan Arrhenius figured out that CO2 could trap heat in the atmosphere. They called it the greenhouse effect, and they weren't wrong. But we didn't listen. Or we did and we shrugged, because what's a few degrees, right? Well, now you know. You walk through a coastal village in Bangladesh, where the ocean has claimed the fields and the salt has killed the crops. You visit a farmer in California, whose well has gone dry. You stand on the edge of a glacier in Greenland, watching it melt faster than models predicted, the sound like distant thunder as ice shears off and crashes into the sea. And still the sky looks peaceful. But it's lying. You sit with a scientist decoding ice cores pulled from Antarctica. These frozen time capsules show the last 800,000 years of Earth's climate, layer by layer. CO2 levels bounce up and down in natural cycles, until now. Now, they've gone vertical. As of the mid-2020s, Earth's atmospheric CO2 concentration is over 420 parts per million, higher than any point in human history. Higher than anything since the Pliocene epoch over 3 million years ago, when sea levels were tens of meters higher and the poles were forested. Historians don't argue if this is happening. They argue how bad it'll get and how fast. The scary part isn't just that the Earth is warming. It's the feedback loops, those lovely little mechanisms where the damage starts to accelerate itself. You remember the permafrost in Siberia. It's melting. That's bad because it's not just ice. It's a vault of methane, a greenhouse gas more potent than CO2. As it escapes, it amplifies the warming. The ice melts faster. More methane escapes. You get the idea. Or the Arctic sea ice. It used to reflect sunlight back into space. Now it's disappearing. Open water absorbs more heat. That makes the region even warmer. Less ice, more heat, rinse and repeat. Even the Amazon rainforest, once a carbon sink, is starting to emit more CO2 than it absorbs. That's like your fridge turning into an oven. You pass through a village in Siberia where ancient zombie viruses, yes, actual term, have been found in thawed permafrost. They're thousands of years old. Most are harmless, probably, but still, it's a plot twist nobody asked for. Meanwhile, the oceans are acidifying, which sounds like a minor inconvenience until you realize it's killing coral reefs, disrupting fish populations, and unraveling entire marine food webs. Here's your quirky tidbit. The ocean has absorbed over 90% of the excess heat caused by greenhouse gases. It's the planet's biggest unsung hero, and it's getting tired. You stand now in front of a map. Wildfires in Canada, floods in Germany, droughts in East Africa, heat waves in the UK, locusts in Madagascar. Climate change isn't the future, it's the wallpaper. But we still treat it like background noise. The temperature rises by tenths of degrees, and we argue over decimals. Scientists plead for net zero emissions. Governments pledge things with hopeful deadlines like by 2050, which, in political terms, may as well be after I'm dead. And yet not all is despair. You walk through a solar farm in Morocco. A vertical wind turbine spins lazily on a rooftop in Sweden. In India, a train pulls into the station powered entirely by sunlight. People are waking up, shifting habits, voting with their wallets, inventing like their lives depend on it, which, of course, they do. Young activists chain themselves to government buildings. Scientists march in lab coats. Even oil executives start using the word transition with suspicious frequency. And then there's you, walking through a city that's hotter than it should be, on a planet that's blinking at you with fevered eyes, wondering why we waited so long. The thing about climate change is, it doesn't end the world in a single moment. It wears it down, storm by storm, crop by crop, species by species. It's slow, it's quiet, and that makes it dangerous. Because humans are bad at long emergencies. You pause in a park. There's a breeze, a child plays, A tree leans just slightly more yellow than it should be for this time of year. You close your eyes. The apocalypse doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just simmers. You're standing in the present now, awkwardly, blinking into a future that hasn't quite happened yet. The smoke hasn't cleared, the warnings haven't stopped, and the doomsday clock is still ticking like an old grandfather watch nobody can quite agree how to wind. This is the final entry, the one where nothing ends but everything almost does, over and over again. And somehow here you are. You walk through a museum, not one filled with fossils or paintings, but a virtual museum of close calls. It's mostly empty hallways, weirdly enough. Unremarkable objects behind glass. A meteorite chunk, a floppy disk, a vial labeled Yersinia pestis, a melted circuit board, a half-written memo from the Cold War, a black and white photo of a man who didn't push a button. These aren't artifacts of apocalypse. They're relics of near misses, souvenirs from the edge of everything. And you've just spent hours strolling through them. What connects them all? Not just their scale or drama, but their pattern. The world doesn't end with one big boom. It dances around its own destruction, flirts with it, forgets, forgives, then flirts again. Every time you think we've reached the final straw, another one gets added, and somehow the camel keeps walking. You step into a dim corner of the museum. There's a small mirror, no label, just you reflected back. Because if there's a common thread through all these close calls, whether it's an asteroid that misses, a volcano that sleeps, or a server room that doesn't reboot, it's this. People were always involved. People who panicked, people who miscalculated, people who forgot to write the year in 4 digits, but also people who paused, people who questioned the alarm, people who rewrote the code, people who aimed a spacecraft at an asteroid and thought, yeah, let's nudge it. And then did. You walk outside. The world hasn't ended, not yet. It's imperfect, loud, and allergic to planning, but it's here. Cities glow, planes land, people fall in love, complain about traffic, rewatch movies they secretly love. It's kind of amazing if you think about it. Because the odds haven't always been in your favor. Remember the dinosaurs, vaporized. Remember Toba, nearly wiped the genetic slate clean. Remember the Cold War. So many close calls, it's basically a miracle we didn't turn the sky into glass. And still, you persisted. Humanity, for all its flaws, is a weirdly resilient organism. It hoards beans for Y2K, it writes poetry during volcanic winters. It invents new religions, myths, and snack foods during plagues. It names islands after fashion statements. And somehow, improbably, it keeps dodging extinction. Historians still argue whether survival is brilliance or sheer dumb luck. It's probably both. But here you are, breathing, blinking, aware of it all. The world has nearly ended so many times, and yet it never has. So what now? You pause, look up at the stars. No flares tonight, no comets. But you know better than to relax too much. Somewhere, an algorithm is writing itself into a corner. Somewhere, a virus is whispering in a bat's wing. Somewhere, a rock is tumbling in the Kuiper belt, waiting for its cue. That's the deal. Life on Earth has always been a risky lease. But now, you're aware of it. And with that awareness comes the possibility, not the guarantee, of doing something different. You walk forward through heat, through wind, through every headline that makes you want to unplug and move into a cave with goats and no internet. But you don't. You stay. You witness. You remember the times the world nearly ended and didn't. Because the thing about near apocalypses is, they don't just warn, they shape. They leave marks, not always scars, sometimes foundations. You build from the edge. You learn. You keep going.